Welcome to our session, Teams Implementing AEL Assessment Guide Revisions, Pandemic Exceptions, with Mahalia Baldini, our Interim State Director. And I'm Beth Ponder, and I'm joined today by Krista Mosher, Liz Moya, and Ashley Winkle on our team to help support you today. So at this point, I want to hand it over to Mahalia Baldini, Interim AEL State Director with the Texas Workforce Commission.
Most of today's webinar, I'm going to spend actually in the Teams training environment and kind of walking you guys through these scenarios in the actual Teams training environment. So if you don't have dual screens, most of today's webinar, you're just going to see me in the Teams training environment. If you do have dual screens and you do have two monitors available, you can pull up the PowerPoint on one of them and then follow along as I go through the Teams training environment for the different discussion points that we're having today. So the purposes of today is I want to kind of walk through, and I'm going to be pretty crisp, I think, in terms of the specialized topics I want to stick to today. But I wanted to walk through a couple of things that you see and that you have in the current assessment guide that we've been getting a lot of questions on. So the ones that we've probably gotten the most questions on and we've provided the most responses to, I want to try to cover those today. So specifically in regards to the assessment guide, starting on pages 27, these are going to be the testing requirements and the new flexibility. Specifically, we're going to talk about and walk through expired test, do a couple scenarios on that, bringing forward old tests to act as a baseline for a new program year, which is super important right now as all of you are doing data entry and trying to get last year's participants pulled forward that have come back for services this program year, and kind of showing you how that's going to work with the new assessment guide, which really isn't that different than how it's always been. And then maybe talk a little bit about staggered tests and what you can expect there and kind of what that looks like. So, and you guys, T-Call, just kind of poke me if there's questions out there as we're moving through each topic so I can answer questions from each topic just kind of while I'm there. So the first thing we're going to talk about is expired test. And I am actually going to, if you have a Teams training environment login, you can certainly, sign in and follow along if you want. But this is, we're going to be doing the bulk of what you're going to see today is me working in here. So for this particular student, what you're looking at here is that Test 7 had an assessment back in 8/1 of 2019. So what that means is that 8/1 2019 is good for 365 days, which means if in the new program year, if I am starting this individual in a class and I'm registering this individual in a class that starts prior to 8/1 2020, that this would be an allowable test and Teams would pull this test forward to be used as a baseline for the new current program year. Now, one thing, and you'll notice this on the PowerPoint, and I want to make sure that everybody understands how Teams works, which is basically, and I'll go back here and pull this up for just a second. Couple of examples that I'm going to run through. Let me go through the PowerPoint slide first, and then I'll try to go back into the training environment. So when you're trying to determine if a test is an expired test, and you're just looking at it from the purposes of like an MSG report, for instance, if you're pulling your MSG report and you're looking for last year, and you're looking at test and when that test occurred, keep these things in mind. Because what Teams is going to do when it's trying to determine if a test is expired is it's going to do a validation check in two ways. The first way is at class registration, which means when you go and add an individual to a class, it's going to check that there is a valid baseline test that can be utilized based off of the test instrument that you chose during class registration. If it is, and there is a test, then it's going to say, okay. The second check it's going to do is at the first contact hour. Okay, so it's going to check it again at the very first contact hour, not any of the other contact hours, but it will at the first one. So I've given you some examples here of what you could potentially run into, and we've had questions about this. So I want to go over them. So for instance, if they have a test from 8/1/2019, the class start date is prior, and these should all be 2020, guys. Sorry, 2020. And you want to have a class start date that's prior to 8/1/2020, it will allow it. First contact hour is prior to 8/1/2020. It's going to allow that old test to be brought forward. If the class start date is prior to 8/1/2020, again, still going to allow it. But if the first contact hour is after 8/1/2020, it's not going to allow it. And I wanted to show you how this really looks like in Teams. At least that's what I was hoping to do for you guys today. So for this particular individual, I'm going back to the main page on the student record. So what I've done here, you'll notice that I registered this individual for a class for a begin date of 7/1/2020. I saved it and it accepted it. Okay. And if I go into this actual class that I've registered this student for, and the reason why it allowed me to register it is because, if you recall, their assessment was from 8/1/2019, which means it's still within that 365 days. However, and you can see it allowed me to start entering in contact hours for the month of July. And because on July 1st of 2020, that old assessment is still valid, it allowed me to do this. However, if I wanted to go in here and let's just say I registered the student for the class because the interest was there, we had to work out some kinks, and let's just say the student didn't actually start, sitting in an instructional part of the class until August. And let's just say this student didn't start their class participation until August 4th. And I go to save this, it's going to give me an error. The reason why is because now that test from 8/1/2019 is not considered a valid test because, again, it's not just about the class registration date. It's also about that first contact hour. So that's always something you've got to keep in mind when you're pulling forward old tests from a prior program year, is that there's actually 2 checkpoints. So we've had a couple of questions about that in the recent weeks that I just wanted to, put out there and kind of show you guys how this works.
And we do have one question from Tiffany Lee. Class registration time is in career training service time, correct?
Class registration, you can actually do it from 2 points. Is that what you mean when you're registering a student from a class? You can actually do it here from the actual participant record or the class record. So like here, you can see I went to this class. There's an option down here for you to add a participant. You can add a participant to a class that way, or you can go to the participant's profile and you can add and register them to a class here at the very bottom under classes. I'm not sure if that's the question, but.
I think she said intake orientation.
Intake orientation. You meaning, do you register a student for a class at intake and orientation? Typically, no. You would register a student for a class after they've been assessed. If you're assessing your students and you're doing placement determination during, at the intake, the point of intake, then potentially you could. In terms of the sequence of events though, intake, orientation occur, assessment, and then class placement, and then class registration. And another thing, I had a question come in. It's not going to be based off of when you do the data entry. Somebody asked, well, what if we do our data entry 2 weeks later? Is that going to affect anything? And the answer to that question is no. It's always going to be based off of whatever start date when you do this class registration piece and you go to sign an individual up for a class. There's this class registration date that it's going to ask you for a class start date. And that is going to be down here. That is going to be what it's going to be based off. So even if you do it 2 weeks later, you're fine as long as that class registration date is within 365 days of the test you're trying to pull forward.
We've had a couple other questions come in. What if the student had hours in July and August? Will teams allow the entry of hours in August since the test expired?
Yes, as long as you get that. And remember, it's all based off of the class registration date and the class start date. So if you register that student, like you said, they had hours in July and August, it's only going to check it at those 2 points. Anything after that, you're fine. It's going to check it based off of the class registration date, which is what I just showed you guys. It's going to be whatever day you say the person entered the class and started, getting instruction time. So let's just say I'm registering this particular student who, again, has an old assessment from 8/1/2019. And I'm saying, okay, it's within 365 days from the start date of the class. Oh, and I can't remember what it was. I think it was a CASAS. And I'm going to say this person started, was in class and started generating contact hours in July. So this is the date I'm going to put in there, is whatever day they started doing their instructional time and they're in class and they're placed. This is also very important, guys. Instrument group is very important. This instrument group, whatever you select, is what's going to determine what test it's going to look for. So I want to show you, I want to go through an error actually while I'm here. So we know that 8/1/2019 test for this particular student is a CASAS test. If I select instrument group TABE and I try to save this, it's going to give me and going to say there's no baseline that's available, okay? So that is something else you want to just make sure when you're training your data entry folks, that obviously instrument group matters. I'm going to say CASAS because that's what it is. If I try to click save, it's going to allow me to save this student and register them for this class. It's also going to allow me to go into this class and enter in any contact hours from the class start date, which is 7/1, till whenever, the end of the program year. It's not going to matter that 365 days is going to expire on 8/1/2020, because Teams is only going to check this at the class registration and the very first contact hour. You're only going to run into trouble when you get into a scenario, which is you add them, let me bring this back. If you get into the scenario where you have a class start date, and I'm changing this right now in front of y'all's eyes because it's driving me nuts. If you guys have a class start date of 7/1/2020, but you don't enter this first contact hour until 8/1, you're going to run into an issue if the timing is more than 365 days. But that's it. After that, you're fine to continue to enter contact hours for that person. So hopefully that makes sense. Any other questions?
Yes, we may have answered Alex's, but with this example, past July, once the student gets past August 1st, 2020, Teams will not take any attendance for that student, correct? With this example, so this was a few minutes ago, past July, once the student gets past August 1st, 2020, Teams will not take any attendance for that student, correct?
Correct. So let's just say you're going to try and make an attempt, and I'll do it. Let me show you that example of what he's talking about, folks. I think I can do it quickly here. Okay, so this is our person, remember. This is their assessment, 8/1/2019. I'm going to go in, and because I don't have any contact hours attached to, I believe it's this one. Okay, so now what I'm doing is the scenario that this person just brought up, and I'm going to try to register this person for a class and enter in contact hours that are past July 1st or past August 1st, okay? So I'm going to do the same thing for this individual, but I'm going to make this start date August 6th. The answer to the question is no. I mean, if you try to register the person for a class that is starting after August 1st of 2020, it's not going to let you, because you have to have a valid test and a valid assessment prior to the date that you are putting in Teams as being the class registration date. So that's why, and let me show you what this looks like here, this error message. It's basically saying when you try to add it past any date past that August 1st date, it's saying that there's no baseline that's present, which is why you have to know what are these old tests that are in the system and whether or not they are going to be valid so that you can pull them forward or not. And it's all based off of the class registration date for the new program year and the first contact hour. So does that make sense? Are there any follow-up questions?
There's a bunch of questions.
Oh boy.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Some of it we may have addressed, but I want to make sure that we don't miss anybody.
Sure.
So this is from Suzanne. And this was a little bit ago, makes sense. My question is, and maybe you'll address it, is since the carry forward test is dated 8/1/2019, will this participant need to be post-tested before 8/1/2020 so that the test does not expire?
No. Great question. And the answer to that is no. You will be able to post-test this individual based off of, minimum hours between tests that are, that have occurred. So it's not like you create a situation where you're bringing a really old test forward and then you're not able to post-test timely or anything like that, or not post-test at all. Teams is going to treat that test as the baseline for that program year, and any test that occurs after that initial test for that program year is going to be considered a post-test. And it doesn't matter if it's been 365 days and any of that. And I think I may have a couple of examples in here that I can, show you guys in terms of the post test. So if I don't, remind me later when we get into some of these other examples.
Okay, next is from Glenda. Does that 365-day rule apply as long as it is a recent TABE exam? For example, if we had someone post-test in May and want to enroll in August, is that allowable?
Sure. So you have a valid test that happened in May, and they're wanting to come back into the program. So instead of giving them a new test before they enter the program in August, you can look in Teams. You can see that there's a valid test in Teams from May. And you're just what Teams is going to do is when you register that individual for a class, it's just going to pull that test forward. And I want to show you guys what that really looks like, and I think I can do it here. So you'll notice that I'm here in this reporting year under 2021. It has pulled this old test forward to be used as a baseline. So any test that I give after this is going to be considered a progress test. And I'm just going to go ahead and do it here in front of you so y'all can see this. Now, you have to post-test in the same test instrument and the same content area in order for it to count as a post-test. That is something else to keep in mind, because I don't want to go down. I want to make sure that, you can see it. So, like, for instance, you can see that I have put in this progress test for the same test instrument for this baseline, and they went all the way from ESL low to exit criteria. Woohoo, 3 gains. All right. So that's how it's going to work. It's not good. The 365 days is not going to come into play when you're really talking about post-testing or whether that test is eligible. Teams just sees this as this is the baseline for this program year or this reporting year, and this is the progress that the student has made. And you'll also, as it appears here, of course, just a reminder, you guys, when you go to the educational outcomes, you're going to also be able to see it there. Next question.
Okay, this is from Martha. So if it finds the last in 365 days, but we have changed from TABE to CASAS this year, so we have given them a CASAS for this new school year. There is a pop-up that shows they have a TABE test that is valid for this school year. Will it accept the new CASAS test as the baseline for this year?
Yes, and that is an update that we put in there, and it's not anything preventative, guys. It's just an FYI. And what it's basically saying, because when we did this, again, we wanted to make sure that you guys knew so you didn't overtest or you didn't, do these things, and of course this was prior to the pandemic when all of this really started happening in terms of building in this with IT, is that that there is already a test out there that meets the qualifications in the assessment guide and can be used as a baseline. That's all it means. It's just kind of like a pop-up to say, I know you're entering this test and you're using this CASAS, but there are these other tests out there that are just valid tests. That's all it's telling you. So it's nothing bad. It's just kind of like a reminder. And typically this will happen, and the main reason why we put that in there is specifically for students that may be transitioning from like an ESL norm test to a TABE norm test when you're crossing over program years. Just to let you know that if they had, another like an ESL test that they were under last year, and now you're giving them a test that is, academically normed for, adult basic education, it's literally just information. That's it.
This one's from Marisa. If that same student has to change classes from day to evening, for example, teams will do that test validity check again for that new class registration, right?
Great question, Marisa. Yes.
All right, let's see. This one's from Lucia. We have a student whose test is expiring in August 2020, and even though the student has hours in July, Teams is not allowing entry of hours for August. Could this be a glitch in Teams?
It could be. We have come up against, I think, 2 things that have been reported so far, and they really have more to do with students who have tested out. So that's a really good point that I want to make for you guys out there that are doing this. And it's just in time, or I would have included it in the PowerPoint. So when we are talking about expired test or valid test, the first thing is they have to be valid. And what I mean by that is if you have someone that is at a best literacy or specifically best literacy, best plus, and they are at the top rung, there is nowhere for them to go from last year, and you're trying to pull that test forward to be used as a baseline for this year, you are not going to be able to do that because it's not valid. In order to establish a baseline, there has to be room for improvement. And the only exceptions to that are in ABE. There's no exceptions in ESL. In ABE with the TABE, even if a person is like an ASE high, let's say you give them a baseline and they're ASE high, the only reason that Teams will still allow you to register that person to a class is because the goal is, maybe text chase. So the only real gain after that would be them getting their high school equivalency. So, but for the best plus and the best literacy, if the last test that they have from the prior program year that's available within that 365 days is something that there can't be progress made against it, it's not going to allow you to use it as a baseline for the new program year. Now that is just normal. That's always been there. That's not something that we created. The issue or the secondary issue to that is when folks are like, well, okay, yeah, I get that, but I also can't add them to a non-NRS class. That is the glitch. The glitch is when we develop the non-NRS class and the non-NRS assessment, what we said is when they try to add and register an individual to a non-NRS class, that it's going to look back and it's going to say, is there any tests within the last 365 days that could potentially be used as a baseline? So we don't have people getting put on these non-NRS classes that actually have an eligible baseline. Well, in theory, that was great, but what we didn't take into account are these individuals who have a test within 365 days that is eligible to be brought forward, but they don't meet the criteria for validity because they are exit level. So Teams is still saying, nope, you can't use it as a baseline for this new program year, even though the test is only 200 days old. And you can't add them to a non-NRS class. Now that is a glitch, and we already are working to resolve it.
Okay, the next question is from Todd, and I think that we've addressed it, but I'm going to go ahead and read the question. And Todd, if you could please let me know yes or no if we've, with that explanation, answered your question. But if the student is registered in class July 1, 2020, their test was from 8/1/2019, they have contact hours in July, will you be able to enter hours in August 2020, or will it give you an error because they don't have a current baseline?
Well, you will have a baseline. I think we went over this one. So you will have a baseline if you're bringing an old test forward from the point of time that you register that student for a class. You can look at the pre-post test page in Teams, and you'll see that that baseline is established at the class registration. And then you will be able to enter contact hours, moving forward, as long as they, again, that first contact hour is also within 365 days of whatever that baseline test is.
Okay, we have a comment from Alex. We run into an issue with tests that have a high Best Plus score. Will not let us enroll students into a class because it says the score is too high, so it will not use that high score test as a base test.
That's the example that I just went over, and that is correct. Normally, guys, if that happens, if you have an old Best Plus, Best Literacy, and they are at a topped out score, normally what I would say is you're going to have to put that person in a non-NRS class until you can provide them with a new assessment. That would be my normal response for those, just so you guys know. However, the glitch is it's not going to let you put them in a non-NRS class either, because the test is it's just not a valid test to be used as a baseline, because there's no progress that can be measured against it. You have to be, in order for a test to be a baseline and be considered as a baseline, you have to be able to make a gain in that same test instrument in that content area. So that's the glitch right there. That's the one that I just went over.
Okay, we have two more.
Okay.
Right now. So Polly asked, do you have to wait until they have 40 to 60, I'm assuming that's contact hours, without penalty? You have to wait until they have 40, 60 contact year without penalty.
So good question. And the way that this will work, and you guys will see this, and I went over this at the summer business meeting, and if y'all haven't had a chance to go through those materials for the Teams piece, do that, because in that I talk about the new pages screens and what you guys are going to be able to see. The good thing about bringing forward old tests when you have like an open period of participation is that all of those contact hours that you've generated since whatever that last test is, because when you register a student for a class, again, guys, it's going to go back and it's going to pull forward whatever the closest test is to that class registration date based off of the test instrument that you choose for the class. So if you choose CASAS, it's going to go and it's going to say, okay, I'm going to look and see what is the closest CASAS test, all content areas based off of this, this class start date. It's going to pull them all forward. Whatever content areas are in there and fall within 365 days, it's going to pull them all forward. Okay. And it's going to establish a baseline for every test instrument and every content area. The good news is it's also going to allow you to use any of those contact hours that are assigned to that test that have happened and occurred between when that test happened and when you brought them forward into the new program year. because it's just a period of participation for the student. They don't care about program years and all this stuff. So it's going to bring all those contact hours forward. So what may happen is you may go in there into Teams, and when you go in here into Teams and you look at this pre-post test page and you look at the number of contact hours that have elapsed, let's just say, okay, this person's has 41. You bring this test forward into the new program year, then what does this mean? Well, it means that they're pretty close to being able to take a post test. So again, just like I did a while ago, when I added that post test, I'm using all of those contact hours that have been generated since the last test as, the minimum hours between tests. Now, if you haven't met the minimum hours between tests, you have to create an exemption for why you're testing early, basically. And that is in the assessment guide in terms of how you have to document that if you are testing a student before the required minimum hours. So you can do it, you just have to document why you're doing it.
Okay, Mahalia, and then we have 2 questions from Suzanne. And again, we might have addressed at least part of her question, but the first question is, what about this scenario? If a participant was pre-tested in TABE in all 3 domains and post-tested only in 1 domain, will Teams only pull forward the post-test domain forward since it was the most recent?
It should pull forward any test in any content area for that test instrument, if it's eligible. So not only the one that's closest. So let's say the closest test is 100 days ago. But there's 2 other tests that are 200 days ago for whatever reason. It should bring forward, if they're different content areas, it should bring them all forward and utilize them as a baseline. Now that's one scenario. I'm glad, Suzanne, you brought that up because I didn't put a test in here for today's purposes, but that's a good one to actually test in the training environment. And you can build that out in there and kind of test how that's going to work.
And then her follow-up question is, will it only pull all the contact hours forward if the participant has not exited?
Right now, I don't think that Teams, it looks at assessments differently than like periods of participation, and it will still pull it forward just because it's about hours between tests and the allowability that we've put in the assessment guide, not about the rules around periods of participation. Now, here's the caveat, guys. What we've said, and the reason why I'm pausing here is because the current assessment guide, and we're talking about it, you guys have given us some great feedback. The current assessment guide says if they exit, you're supposed to automatically retest them at the, when they come back. Now, we've waived that for the pandemic. So for right now, the question is no, because, Teams isn't it's just gonna look for whenever the last test was. If we decide in the future outside of pandemic purposes to, keep that in the assessment guide and we say they exit and when they come back, you are required to retest them, then again, think of the logic of how Teams looks at things. It's always going to choose whatever the test is that's closest to that class start date, which would be that new test that you are now would be required to give a person who is considered an exiter. So hopefully that answers your question. Right now, it's just going to look for 365 days. There's a lot of folks that are probably on the webinar that are not as familiar with how Teams kind of works and what what they're really looking at when they're looking at some of these things. So I just want to make sure that we're kind of running through some of the examples for those folks too. So if you're new and you don't know some of these things, be specific, and I'm happy to build out here in the system for you and kind of show how some of these things work. One of the things, like for this particular person, they have a little bit different scenario. So again, this was the one I was going to use to show you guys, like they have a test in here. It was just taken back in February that they could pull forward, but because it's an advanced ESL test, this would be one that we would run into an issue with utilizing as a baseline, right? Because they're the highest they can be, for the best literacy. So Teams isn't going to let you pull this one forward. Now, the way that you can look at some things, and let me show you, for those of you that have not gotten familiar with the MSG report. So one thing that you can do when you're really trying to figure out is you can pull this MSG report. You can pull it for last year to look at all the students that you had in the program last year. And the things that you want to pay attention to are, these columns right here. It's going to say the days since, elapsed since the last test. You will be able to see how much time you have to pull an old test forward. You will also be able to see all this great information once it gets built out. These students just haven't done anything because I haven't built it yet. But you'll be able to see the different content areas, the test instruments, and what the actual pre-test date was for these individuals. So like the person that we literally just added, here they are. You can see that their pre-test date was 8/1/2019. If I go in there and I put a post-test in for any date or time after 8/1/2019, which would be like, I register for a class and I'm like, oh, I see that you did 50 hours last program year and you've been in the program, let's give you a post-test. They can get a post-test even though they're 14 days, past their start date in class, because it's not based off of that. It's based off of all the instruction since the last test. So you technically could earn a gain for that individual, 14 days after they've started class, because it's a new program year, but to that participant, they have been doing this instruction since, last year. That's the whole thing with the periods of participation and why I'm adding those screens in there, because we've got to get in this space in our head where we're really thinking about participants don't care about program years. That's a reporting thing. We need to be looking to see when was the last time and how much instructional content has this person absorbed, and are they ready to take a test? And if the answer to that is yes, then that's what we should be doing.
This is from Aurora. If a participant started this fiscal year with a BEST as baseline, we're getting into the BEST and CASAS again, has been tested with a CASAS 2 weeks after, will the participant need to be post-tested with BEST, or can we test the participant with CASAS after completing 40 hours from the date of the CASAS test?
So you have options, and let me see if there's an easy way for me to build this out in front of you guys. So depending on how you've registered the student for the class is going to depend on whatever baselines get established for this program year. So I think they said that they had a BEST test, but then they tested them with CASAS as well. When you register a student for a class, you have to tell the system what test instrument you're going to be using to measure progress for that individual. So for instance, on this person, they have this BEST literacy that's in here from back in, February, but it's an advanced ESL, right? So let's just say that I'm going to go in and I'm going to add, I'm just going to add real quick a TABE score. And I'm going to go back, y'all. You won't be able to do this. I can do it because I extended the data entry time for me to do this so I could do some training with y'all. The reason why you won't be able to do it is because it's in a locked reporting year and y'all have already done your closeout. So what I've done is I've added an assessment for this individual, right, for the TABE, because they have, advanced out of their BEST literacy. Now I'm going to go to the class registration page and I'm going to register them for a class for 2020. Maybe this student comes back and says, oh, I'm not ready. Can I, go back to my, my ESL class? If I try to register this student in the class using the BEST Plus option, it's going to tell me I can't. Kudos for anybody that can say why they can't.
There's no chance for advancement.
There's no chance for advancement, which is why they would not be able to use this. When I go to save this, it's going to pop this up and it's going to say the following is a list of all the other NRS approved tests within the 365 days that you could be using. Now, the reason why it's telling me that is because I am trying to enter an instrument that is Best Plus and Best Literacy. It's just letting me know that this person has an additional thing. Now, it should give me an error, just like this. And it says, you can't do this because this person cannot make a gain. And I'm like, whoop, okay, let me change this over to tape. And then I try to do this with tape, and it's going to tell me that there's a Best Literacy in there. So I'm just showing you guys, this is just for your information. Whenever I click save, it's going to allow me to do that because I'm utilizing a test instrument that is considered valid and can be used as a baseline for the current program year. So when you go in now under this program year, this reporting year, this is, I've brought forward this old test from last year and it's going to be used as a baseline. Now, let's just pretend, because I don't have time to do the data entry and I don't want to take up that much time. Let's pretend that this student has accumulated at least 40 hours since this 6-8 test that they've done. Okay. I'm just going to assume that that is something that's happening. I'll go ahead and enter in a post test for this person. So I'm going to assume that this person has, accumulated enough time to take a post test. I'm going to add an assessment, tape 12 this time. I'm going to put in today's date, and I'm just going to go higher. And y'all, again, I don't know what the scores are off the top of my head. Language, top 7. So it's going to save it. And then when I go back to the assessment, you can now see that all the tests are here. When you go to the pre-post test gains page, you're going to see now that it has changed this over to 828. Does anybody know why that is? Oh, I actually really like this example. Let me show y'all why I like this example.
Due to the lack of contact hours?
That's right, because there's no contact hours. Again, class registration and first contact hour is what establishes the baseline for the current program year that you're in. So if you have an old test and you bring that test forward, and this goes back to what Suzanne was asking earlier, I think, which is if you bring an old test forward based off of the class registration date, it's going to do that. But if you don't add any contact hours and then you just try to do a test when there's no contact hours for this program year, it's gonna reestablish a baseline because there's nothing that connects that old test to this program year in terms of instruction. So that's a really, I think that may be what Suzanne was asking earlier, actually. So now let me show you the same person, same thing. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to delete this test for this same person. I'm going to go in and I'm going to, first I'm going to change this date so I can actually add some hours in here. Now, when I go in and I add hours for this individual, and then I'm going to enter the exact same assessment that I just tried to enter, and it showed and reestablished the baseline. And I hope you guys don't do data entry the way that I do. Now, all of a sudden, we put these hours in here. Now this person is established as having direct contact hours in a class for this reporting period. So now when I go in and I add this assessment in, I'm going to add the exact same thing I did last time for the exact same date, today's date. And I'm going to add those scores back in. And when I go back and I look at the pre-post test gains page, now you can see that it's treating that progress test, or that test that I gave them this year, as an actual progress. And it's maintaining that the test that got brought forward is being used as a baseline. Are there any questions that are coming in?
We had one question from Elizabeth that I think we've addressed. She was also talking about a student that has topped out in Best Plus and not being able to enroll them in class. Elizabeth, if we did not answer your question, please let me know. And then we have one from Karen. Will we discuss parallel classes? Are there instructions regarding parallel classes and adding students to parallel classes?
There are instructions in terms of how to physically, how to do that, or kind of when to do that. I think you can find that in the materials from the summer business meeting, but I'm happy to talk about it here. So, and I recently got a question from Austin Community College, which was basically like, oh my gosh, do we have to do this for every class? So here's the deal. The reason why we said we wanted to do the parallel class instead of doing just like one big class that's just like, hey, here's all of our non-NRS tested students, right? Instead of just creating this sort of big bucket to put all those folks in, the reason why we said parallel is just for local program management purposes. When you do a giant bucket class, you cannot and should not assign, of course, all these teachers that are happening in real life and really teaching those students to that class. We used to do this with distance. We saw this with distance learning a lot, which is a little bit easier because it's not instruction based, it's just curriculum based. But when you're talking about something that's happening in real life that has a live instructor and you put them in a bucket in teams, it's going to look like Jane Doe is teaching, 350 students because you have to assign an instructor just like you do all the classes. But, there's just no way. It just limits your ability locally and our ability here at the state level to kind of dig in, right? That being said, I don't have an issue with you guys if y'all wanted to put all of your non-NRS students into a bucket. The only caveat is that I would that for IET students, you're not going to be able to do that. The reason being is because you have to attach those classes to a training service. When you go and you attach a class to, or assign a class to a training service, like this, for instance, all the students that are in this class get that training service. So you can't do like a bucket class for your IET folks because, everybody would have a training service essentially. So for your IET folks, you will have to do the parallel classes for anyone that's a non-NRS student. But if you guys want to do buckets for your other ones and you have a really clear like remote testing, you're working towards getting those folks into a regular class, I'm fine with it.
Okay, we have a couple of follow-up questions from Aurora. Aurora, I'm just going to go ahead and unmute you if you don't mind, so you can explain to Mahalia exactly what you're needing and what you're asking.
Okay, hi everybody. My question is, because of the fact that we can use previous tests to start a participant for this this program year, we have started some students with BEST because that's the last test that they had. But we've tested some of these students with CASAs because that's what we're going to move our program forward with. So my question is, because the BEST Plus or the BEST Literacy is there and we used that test to start the student, will we have to post-test that student, that particular participant with the BEST, or can we wait to test that student with CASAs after they've completed 40 hours with CASAs? The student has, we've already started the student. He has contact hours with BEST. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. It makes sense to me. I don't know how much sense that's going to make to to everybody else. So, but it's a good question. So, Teams is basically when you're in that situation where you have brought forward an old test and you have now attached contact hours to an old test, like you said that there are contact hours that are actually attached, like at the class level to the BEST test. That's what you said, correct?
Yes.
Like you registered the student to the class with the test instrument that is BEST.
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
BEST plus BEST literacy. Okay. So once you have attached contact hours to that BEST plus or BEST literacy in this example, then you have options, right? You can post-test on the BEST literacy and BEST plus. If you've moved those students into classes that now have a CASAS instrument, and the reason why I keep bringing that up is because a lot of times people think we're going to switch over to CASAS, and they give the student that is in a class that is registered to a BEST plus or BEST literacy instrument, but we're providing them a CASAS test, and we want to just kind of, we're just switching our test instrument, which is fine. You can totally do that. The problem is that in Teams, if you were to, let's just say, you give a person a CASAS, you never go back and post-test on the best at all, and you just wait for that student to accumulate enough time for that CASAS test. If there's physically not any contact hours that are actually attached at the class level to that CASAS test, you will not get, you can't get any progress from it until you attach it to class. So that's the choice that you guys would have to make, and the cleanup process for that is not easy. So here's what I tell people: if you're going to switch a test, that's fine, but you want to make sure that you also create a class and you kind of mirror and move those students over into that CASAS class, so that you essentially have students that will have two baseline options for the year. They'll have a BEST option, and then they will have a CASAS option. And then, the test publisher's minimum requirement of hours just exist. And then you have a choice that, you can post-test on a BEST or you can post-test on a CASAS. And that will be up to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope that may be clear as mud. And I'm happy to actually look up a student, after this. I don't want to show PII, obviously, but I can kind of walk you through that and kind of show you what I mean. That's an example, guys. Like last year, I found quite a few people that had that exact situation. And the reason they were calling, they were like, hey, it's not showing as, a progress. This person had progress. But if there's no instructional time attached to those tests, it's not going to be really a progress test in terms of gains for the student. You have to show the instructional time attached to that actual test instrument. So if you are in a situation where you're transitioning your test instrument from, let's say, a TABE to a CASAS, or a BEST plus BEST literacy to CASAS, what you have to ensure in order to make progress on those assessments is that you have connected instructional time to those test instruments in Teams. So giving them these tests, these CASAS tests, like outside of, them being attached to the class registration, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't give you any credit. It doesn't, you're not going to get any gains from that. You have to provide the assessment, enter the assessment in Teams, and then attach that assessment instrument to an actual class registration and to contact time in order to be able to actually get credit for any progress made on those assessments. So I don't know if that clears it up or not. And what you guys are looking at right now is, I just briefly wanted to talk about, and maybe this is a good time to transition. If it's not, and you have more questions or more examples on other stuff, I'm happy to talk about that. is the staggered testing for new students. This was an option that we provided you guys that you could stagger your test results. And I wanted to just kind of show you, if you were to do that, you can put them in, they look something like this. The contact hours elapsed and all of this is getting changed and updated. So you're going to be able to see this. So it will count the contact hours by contact area and instrument group, and that's not going to change. So just you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're staggering pre-test. You have to stagger your post-test. Other questions out there, Beth?
Yes, we have a couple more. This one is, if a participant has a valid NRS assessment within 365 days of class start date and first contact hour, but has been flagged as exited by teams, can they be registered to a class?
No.
Well, that was easy.
That was easy. Yeah. And that's the whole, that is the test may be less than 365 days old, but it's not valid to be used as a baseline in a new program year because there is no progress that can be made from that test instrument. So your options there are, you either have to give them a new test, move them to a TABE, move them to a CASAS. You have to give them a new test, or the other option would be to add them to a non-NRS class until you can give them an NRS approved test. However, we have a glitch right now. So if you're in a situation that this person just brought up, just know that we have a glitch that's not allowing you to add them to a non-NRS class either. And that's the glitch that we're working on that I went over earlier. But those would be your two options for someone that's in that situation. Like, hey, they took a test 6 months ago, but they're out of range. And I need to give them a new test. Well, your options are you either give them that new assessment, TABE or CASAS or whatever, or typically you would enter them into a non-NRS class and kind of make a placeholder until you could do those things. Right now, the non-NRS class is not an option. So really your only option is to provide them with a new test to reestablish a baseline for this program year. Or track them, and then when we make the bug fix, you will be able to add them into a non-NRS class and teams and track them that way.
Okay. Next, we baselined HSE students with a non-approved assessment in May and June. Will the last year need to be invalidated because it is not letting the assessments be added because they are the last year?
Ooh, I'm not sure I know what that means. Say that one more time, Beth.
Or Karen, if you want to unmute, that's fine. We baselined HSE students with a non-approved assessment in May and June.
May and June, okay.
Will the last year need to be invalidated because it is not letting the assessments be added because they are the last year?
I said that if you try to enter any test now after 7-1 that took place before 7-1, it won't let you put them in because that's part of a locked program year.
Yeah. It's past the data entry deadline, so it's not going to let you.
Okay, let's see if we have anything else. And then Suzanne says, are you saying that if a participant has exited our program, we cannot carry that test forward?
No, I am saying that you can right now. The assessment guide, this is one of the waivers that we created for the pandemic. And I want to be really clear that this is something that, a waiver that we created for the pandemic. So in the assessment guide, if you're reading it, what it says is if a student is an exiter of yes, then if they come back into services, even if they have a valid test, 365 days or 150 days, which is what it says in the assessment guide, you have to reestablish a baseline. That's what the policy says right now. We created a waiver that said, even if they're an exiter and they come back, As long as the test, the last test that is in Teams for that person fits within that 365 days and is a valid test, meaning they haven't topped out, just because we know that's a glitch, then you can go ahead and utilize that test and put the person in class and place them in class based off of whatever that last valid test is. So you don't have to retest them before you put them in class if they're an exiter and they're coming back and they have a valid test. So hopefully that answers Suzanne's question.
You got a "phew" in all caps.
Yeah, we made a lot of exceptions, guys, just because of the pandemic, and we know, and we just know that with the remote testing and the limited face-to-face testing that can happen, that we needed to create as much flexibility as we could. And, so that is here. Now, whether or not we continue to maintain that after this program year, and just so you guys know, we don't have any, we're not going to make any major changes to any of the flexibilities that we've created for you for this program year. We'll see how all of this shakes out after Christmas and moving towards the end of the year to see if there's anything that, we want to, pull back or want to change. We have gotten some feedback from the assessment guide, internally. So we'll take that into account as well. And one of them is, Adam Leonard, our Department of Operational Insight guy. You guys know who he is. He's basically like, why are you going to make them retest just because they exited? If it's valid, let them use it. I'm like, all right, Adam. So just know those are things that we're talking about, and we'll continue to look at it. I mean, we're not trying to create, difficulties for you guys for sure. Any other questions?
That is all I have at the moment.
Perfect. So what I'm going to say, and what I want to kind of, I think, take a moment just to go over with you guys is this MSG report. Now, this one's not very filled out because I'm pulling it from the training environment. And this is another reason why we have provided, some access to this training environment so that you guys can go in there, you can build it, you can kind of work with Teams. The best way to understand Teams is just going in there and trying to build stuff and it telling you, no, you can't do that. Or, hey, it lets you do that, We really try very hard to keep Teams aligned to whatever the policy is, which is why I'm always busy trying to do Teams enhancements. So Teams is really built and, based off of what the policy is. So it's a good playground for you guys to go in and see what is kind of allowed in there and what isn't allowed in there, because it's kind of pretty clear. But the MSG report is something that's been out there since March. I know some of you are using it. The feedback that I've gotten from people that are using it is that it's awesome. So for those of you that aren't that familiar with it, I just wanted to take this opportunity to kind of walk through and show you some of the things that you're going to be able to see on here, and just moving forward in general. One thing that's always been a mystery in Teams up until now has been who is serving participants within a program year. You guys have been very kind of blind in the past to say like, oh, wait, somebody else is providing services to the student other than me. And on the back end, the data is so crazy looking because you will have basically the student who this poor thing is like getting tested all over the place, but you guys are limited because you're only really seeing what you're doing with that student. Those are some changes we're trying to open up in Teams. We want there to be transparency of the services that students are receiving across the state. So one thing that we've added to this particular test is which grant recipient is providing the information that you're seeing. So you will have, and I saw this a lot with LCOT, and I have to give a shout out to Risa and LCOT folks because they always have really great data. And I tend to look at their data because I know they're very meticulous about, making sure it's right. So I always go there and I can get really good stuff. So for the grant recipient, if you have an individual, let's just say, Enzo Baldini here, which I can't say that too loud because that's my dog and he's right beside me. Enzo here has come into the program, and what I'm going to be able to see, any grant recipient that has worked with them within this current program year. So if there's other tests out there that have been provided to this actual participant, you're going to be able to see all of it on this report, not just your stuff. So that's really important. This column C, post-test needed, is also very helpful. You'll see that some of these say yes and some of them say no. If you were to dig into this, the reason why it says yes is going to be based off of two key factors. One is going to be the hours elapsed since the last test. And what you can see here is 58, 54, 52. It's going to look back to this test instrument and it's going to say, are those elapsed hours enough for this person to be ready to post-test? So if you see a yes there, that means that there's enough hours. And again, this is going to tabulate from the pre-test date, those hours, all the way through whatever, the current date is that you pull this report. So whatever day you pull this report, it's going to tell you based off of that information if the student is ready to test. So I know earlier they said, well, what if the pretest date is like, we're bringing this forward from way back when? It's still going to pull forward any elapsed hours that are attached to that specific test instrument. It's going to pull them forward. So you can see here, days elapsed since last test, 393, but 77 hours total. So it's just a great report. I wanted you guys to at least see this, and I want you to get really comfortable with using it because there's just a lot of good information in there. You're also going to be able to see things like this, your pretest EFL. You can see here that this person had a pretest of ASE high. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means there's no post-test that's going to get them a gain. So you can flag these individuals that are in that situation to say they need some other MSG in order to meet performance, because they're pre-testing at ASE high. So there's just a lot of uses here for this one. And if you scroll over, which typically all this information would be filled out, when you pull it on your end, you're going to be able to see all of this. But a couple of things I also wanted to point out that you can do with this particular report is if we've received a match for a credential, for a high school equivalency credential, you're going to see that date in here. If you have manually entered one, you will see that in here. Exiting AEL and entering into post-secondary, if you have went into teams and you have put that in as a measurable skills gain, you're going to see it in here. One of the important features that I added to this report was an IET flag. And I've talked about this in a couple of other webinars, and I want to talk about it here. If you are trying to figure out, and I know Ann Savino has been, we go blind up here trying to look at data, as you can imagine, across, 37 providers and plus all of our Accelerate Texas folks as well. We have got to, if we are spending our training dollars, making sure that we are attaching those individuals to a training service. So if we ever get called up and they say, what type of training are you doing with this money? We have access to that information and we rely heavily on you guys to provide that to us. So the IET flag here is not attached to a fund code. It is attached to an actual training service, which means if I go into Teams and I pull fund codes that are IET specific, IET AFLA, IET Civics, IET Corrections, whatever is that IET fund code, and I run this report with those fund codes, and then I come here and this column says, no, 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 then what you know and can surmise is that you have a lot of IET students that are attached to a fund code, but they are not attached to a training. And that is a big no-no, and we are going to start really looking at this and kind of cracking down on that. We've gotten much, much better, but we have got to make sure that we can attest to the training dollars that we're spending and to the performance that we are gaining by calling someone an IET participant. So we need to make sure that we're, putting that in there. So those are kind of some key points I just wanted to go over with the MSG. Are there any questions that are happening out there?
Well, we have a couple of folks who've got some true love going for the MSG report. And then we had a question about access to the training environment. How does somebody get access?
So good question. Guys, I'm willing to open this up to people who want it, but I am going to ask that if you are a data entry person or just anyone that wants access to it, you want to go through your local director and have them make the request for you, or at least include them on the request. That's what I've told Blanca to do. So I'm happy to give this to whoever wants it. So I am really encouraging some cross training at the local level for teams. So if you want it, send us through the team's technical assistance email box, and I'll show you real quick what Blanca's going to tell you to do so that you know. Just like regular teams, everything about the training environment is set up exactly like regular teams. So no surprises in there. Anytime I make an enhancement to the teams that you guys use to input your student data, it gets made to this training environment at the exact same time. We deploy it to both. We actually deploy it to all. We have 5 systems, guys. It's crazy. So I'm always like going up here into this URL, and I'm like, okay, make sure you're in the Teams training environment because I have access to 5 systems and they all look the same. But from the logon page, this is where you can request sign up for a user ID. You're going to select that. You're going to fill this out just like you would for normal Teams. It's going to make you go through all of this because, again, everything works the same. I would really encourage you, if you do have access to the regular Teams environment and this one, whatever you do, _train or something that's going to help you to keep this straight because it can get a little confusing. You're going to fill this out. You're going to click next, go through all the steps. It's going to submit it to Blanca as an application, just like the other environment. Then what I would want you to do is to send us an email, go through your local folks to make sure that this is okay. Send us an email and say, I filled out my application. Please go in and approve it. And then we can go in and approve it. There's no P41. There's no, there's none of that we're going to have to require because there's no PII and there's no, this is all just made up stuff. So you should be good to go there. And just fill it out and send it in, and then send us an email and let us know that you've submitted an application. So that part's pretty easy. And the same thing I will say, guys, in terms of the access related stuff, you can tell us what level of access that you want. That's fine. You can tell us that whenever you submit the application because it's going to ask you. So guys, I know this is a crazy way to do this, but here's the thing. If I try to do this in a PowerPoint with screenshots and everything else, it would take me, I don't even know how many days to do that and make it all accessible. I mentioned at the summer business meeting, I'm happy to kind of jump on here and just do general, Teams questions. Sometimes it's hard for me to build everything out in the system that I think you guys are going to ask me questions about because I just never know, and you have great questions. But if you can think of a better way to do this in order to get the information out, leave me, throw something in the chat. If this kind of talking through it and working through it works for you guys, let me know. Because we've got a lot of enhancements that are going to be coming out, and I want to be able to, do these, but I want to make sure you're getting something out of them. And the reason why I'm comfortable with doing these is because we put out the Teams release notes ahead of these types of webinars, so you can kind of go in there. But on this particular topic, it's just really based over the assessment guidance and the flexibilities and exceptions that we've created in there. And I would also just say, if you are experiencing any issues as you're starting to build out the new program year, let us know. This one little this glitch that came up recently, man, I was like, oh, we should have caught that during testing. But you just can't test every scenario. So send those in. And that's all I've got.
Well, thank you, Mahalia. Wonderful job as usual. We've got some people that are really saying they like the hands-on. They like to be able to ask questions.
Mahalia, this is Denise from Harris County.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I have a quick question for you. During the Summer Institute, you talked about reports and reporting and maybe getting a group of people together to actually, like for the, I guess, what you call it, table for those type of reports. Do you know when it's going to be coming down the pike?
Yeah, so Denise, I sent out something to Danielle because you guys are so big.
Yeah.
I sent something out to her maybe late last week, so she hasn't had it very long. I am in the process right now of scheduling all of those. If you're interested, I would reach out to her and just say, hey, I'm really interested in being part of this team. What I've kind of told them is I want to keep it intimate, but I also want to make sure that we have coverage and like, especially in our larger consortia. I mean, obviously you guys are very big and that's a lot of information to get disseminated. So probably the more people that, know what's going on, the better. So I'd reach out to Danielle and just say, hey, I'm interested in being in this. And what I told her is she can share it, that information with folks.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good weekend. Don't work too hard.
Oh, I should take my own advice. That's what I tell the staff all the time.
This is Karen. I had the question regarding the parallel classes. I did attend the summer session. Where can we find the presentation and also instructions on adding students that were on the tracking sheet?
And Karen, is that like a function that you normally do?
Yes.
Okay. So for adding of the students that are on the tracking sheet, like students, let's say for last year, you are not going to be able to go in and add them for last year. So what you're going to want to do though is to create those non-NRS tests and non-NRS classes for this year. So are you asking if you can add them for last year?
Well, we gave them the non-NRS test in May and June. So when you put that date in there, it doesn't allow you.
Oh, yeah. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to add a new non-NRS test. I'm glad now I understand what the question is. Sorry. So the non-NRS tests are only good for one program year. So they basically expire in June. So for this year, because Teams is only going to pull forward NRS approved assessments and tests, it's not going to pull forward like any non-NRS test that you put in there. So for this program year, you're going to have to go in and add just non-NRS test and attach it to this program year, and then you should be good.
So you're saying I need to retest?
No. You don't need to retest. What test were you using for the non-NRS?
In the GED Academy.
Yeah. So instead of doing the, like the GED official practice test for this program year, you're just going to select non-approved assessment.
Okay, because I did that. And like I said, we tested them in May and June and it wouldn't allow it because they said that it's already locked.
Yeah, you're going to have to say that you're basically looking at this program year and you're saying these people are still eligible for services in this program year. And so the date of that assessment is going to be like 7/1.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's more like an eligibility check for staff. Like if they're still in the program, you did a test in May and June for the non-NRS, like through GED official practice test, HiSET or TSIA or whatever. That's fine. You don't have to retest them or anything. Those are just options. And so for this program year, you can just select the generic non-NRS approved test, which is really more of a staff determined eligibility. And you're basically just saying, as of 7/1, they're still participating and they're still eligible,
Okay, so I just use the date 7/1.
Yeah, just use the date 7/1 and it'll reestablish that for this year. That's a really good point. I need to bring that up on a call or something to go over that.
Okay, thank you. That clarified everything. But I still need the instructions where I would get that because even the session is not showing in my PD portal that I attended those sessions.
Yes, and let me see, T-Call folks may be able to pull this up quicker than I can in terms of where you can find the materials for that session.
Karen,
Yes,
this is Beth. I put a link in the chat that will take you to the page that has all of the materials from the summer business meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I have a question in regards to that with the parallel classes. If we have to put a start date in there of 7/1, right? Or use that 7/1 date saying that they're still eligible because they took a test, right? What's going to happen as far as basically assessing or testing them later? Because we'll never be able to put a post-test in there then for them, right? For the entire program year.
No. So let me explain how that works. So like for the non-NRS assessment, there is no post-test. There's nothing that you can give that person that's going to make them have a gain. The only way that you can make a gain on a participant for performance purposes is with an NRS approved test. So if you add a test, so let me give you an example. If you add a non-NRS approved test, like a non-NRS approved test, it's going to come up as other assessment and teams for 7/1. Then it just stays open and it'll, it's good all the way through June 30th because there is no post test. Even though you guys, if you're, let's use the example of the GED official practice test. If you're using that as sort of this official, non-NRS approved assessment, just so you can add a person to a non-NRS approved class for this year for tracking purposes, let's say you give them that and they're in one zone when you give them that. And then maybe you test them again and you test their readiness, 3 months from now, and they have actually shown on the GED official practice test that they have made, considerable gains. Well, that is great and it's wonderful, but you will never get performance for that. It won't show up anywhere. It's not going to show up on like the pre-post test pages. It's not going to show up on it as an educational outcome because the only thing that we can report federally are the NRS approved tests. So this is why I'm saying going through that scenario, because the best thing that you can do is transition them to an NRS approved test as quickly as you can. Because even if you give them like one test at the beginning of the year and then you give them another test on something that is a non-NRS approved test, you're never going to see any gains for that person in terms of performance.
Okay, that's what I figured. I was actually speaking about that with my coworkers before a couple weeks ago, and that's exactly what you said is what I thought would be.
Yeah. That's the rub. I mean, getting that push to get them like an official NRS approved test. And then what happens is maybe even, they've been in the program under, like a GED official practice test for a couple of months and they're going to class and whatever. And then you give them an actual TABE or a CASAS or something that you can get a baseline for. You're still going to have to kind of wait, obviously, to give them a post test because you want to make sure that, you've had enough instruction time that they're going to make a gain based off of that first NRS test, approved test that you've given them. Does that make sense? So it's you're losing all of this instruction time, before that actual approved NRS test. And I hate that. I hate that for you guys. But Octay and the feds have not given us any wiggle room around how to measure progress, and it still has to be on an NRS approved test, unfortunately.
Got it. And I had one more question regarding the example that you pulled up, the baseline that was 6/8 last program year, right at the end, June 8th. And then you put the hours in there and it showed that it pulled the progress test over 8/28. You put the example in there with the hours, you put them in the month of August. Had you put the hours in there, the same example, same scenario with the hours, let's say the baseline was 6/8, that let's say they started going to class 6/9, and let's say you put all of those hours in there, and then it would have just carried over through the next program year as normal, right? Those hours, and then we would have still been just pull up the MSG report to see if they're ready to progress test, even though they've crossed over. Right. We would have just carried on as
normal. It will bring them forward, but here's the thing, and that's a good question, like a little nuance there. Until you add a contact hour in the current program year, it is not going to apply it as something that you can get a post test on for that year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Why
Yeah.
not?
Have to have contact time attached to the program year in which you are utilizing that test instrument as a baseline. It's going to pull forward all like the other hours, have to establish that the student is still in class in the current program year. At least that is my understanding. That's actually a really good example, but you can, go in and test it, or we can go in and test it.
Can we look at one? Because,
Yeah.
that was a huge question for me, because we have students that are clients that are crossing over that started at the beginning, like the baseline in June 8th.
Yeah.
And then they're in class, let's say June 10th, they're in class 2 days later. How does that work?
Yeah. So I'm going to delete all these hours for this year and just put in hours for last year, if it lets me. Beat that assessment. I'm telling you, doing these though, it keeps me sharp too, because this is really, honestly, this is how I've learned everything. It's just playing around in here. Okay, so I'm going to go to this student. Here's the class I believe that they were in for last year. And I just want to make sure that they have hours in here for June. So there's 12 hours attached to this test now.
Okay. Thank you.
Registered them here. So I'm not going to put any hours for this program year, and I'm going to throw an assessment in here and just see, like right now it's saying it's a baseline. But I'm not going to attach any hours to it, and I'm going to put in this next test and just see if it either recreates a baseline, and that will tell us if we need contact hours in the current program year. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Or if those 12 hours that is attached to the last test that we have in there are going to come forward and act as instructional time. Is that good news for you?
Yes, it says progress. So
Wow. Yeah, I wasn't even sure that would work. So
that's my question.
Yeah. So if they have hours, so the only hours attached to this particular test are back in June, but there are hours attached to that actual test in those content areas, then I haven't added any other, let me just double check, but yeah, there's no hours down here. There's nothing for this year.
But if you go back, you can pull up the last program year. Go back. You can change at the top right under the reporting year, put 2019, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
They're the hours, right?
Yeah.
6-4.
So these are the hours that I entered for June. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so there were 12 hours that I entered after the 6/8 assessment date. Here, you can see it here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
So it basically pulled all of these hours forward. And then I didn't add any hours for the PY 2021, and I just threw an assessment in there. So what this basically means is that you can just attach a progress test as long as there are elapsed contact hours that you're going to be bringing forward with the test. It's only the ones where you have a test that don't have any contact hours attached to it that you're going to run into problems, and you're going to have hours attached to it in the new program year.
So if there was that test taken June 8th, just like that, and no contact hours, that's where we would have run into that scenario that you showed earlier in the call.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. It's going to take it as basically this is the baseline again. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if I eliminate all of these, these hours here, And there's no hours that were, I'll do it right now just so I can be sure. Because you never know. That's where you're going to get into it's going to take the newest test as establishing a new baseline. Now we're back to 0 contact hours. And I'm just going to add this test back in here. And there's no contact hours in the current year either. And this should reestablish this. Okay, no hours, nothing's going on. Let's look at the assessments. Okay. Right now it's using this as the baseline for this year. Okay, I know what it is. Whew, I know what it is. Okay, let me show you what happens.
Okay.
This is why. If you don't have any hours attached until after this assessment has been added, I'm changing this to like third. I'll show you what happens. The issue is it's always going to pull the most recent in comparison to the first. Every time I do one of these, I have so much appreciation for data entry staff. Y'all have no idea. Especially whenever I have to do it for the profiles. Oh my gosh, those are the worst. So let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add in contact hours for August. And when I do this, this is what's going to establish that 828 as the baseline.
Oh, okay. We didn't put the hours
because
in
it's
for
going to
August.
pull again from the first contact hour, whatever assessment is closest to that first contact hour. That's what I did last time. See how it changed?
Yeah, it didn't. Yeah, that's why. Okay. All right. That
I made
makes
myself
sense.
nervous there. I was like, wait a minute.
Thank you. And I do enter a lot of data, so thank you.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, that'll give you some idea just in terms of, how the system's going to treat things. So it's really, when is that first contact hour starting for this year?
Okay, Mahalia, we had one question about that student from Lorraine, and then I think we're going to have to call it quits. Okay, so Lorraine asked Mahalia, if you put an end date of 8:30, can you go back and register the student for the same class using CASAS without needing to create another mirrored class? Will Teams allow us to do that same program year?
If you put in a class end date of 8:30 on the same instrument, or Lorraine, do you want to unmute yourself or?
Okay, so if you still have that one assessment that you have in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the student has hours, but can you put an end date of 8:30
On the class?
on that? Yeah, right here where the student is registered. Yes.
Okay.
Put an end date of 8:30. And then we're just saying, theoretically speaking, that the student has tested in CASAS. So now can we go back in and register the student for that same class, but using that different instrument group? It would now be CASAS.
Yeah, you can, as long as there's no contact hours attached to it, which right now, are there? I think there are in there. So like if I try to change this to CASAS, it's not gonna let me because I don't have a CASAS test in here. but there's also contact hours. So you can change it here, Lorraine, but if there's contact hours that are attached to the original instrument group, you won't be able to do that. You'll have to add a new class.
Create a new class, the mirrored class.
Correct. You'll have to create a mirrored class for students that are switching their instruments.
So technically in Teams, we could name it class 1A and class 1B. So if the student has already been in class 1A under TABE, then we want to register them for that same class. They would be class 1B under the CASAS.
You could come up with a naming convention to do that.
And then we would have like the third class for class 1 NRS.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Unless you wanted to do a full bucket, like you guys can do a bucket, and y'all are pretty small, so that may be something, to consider. It just, the only ones you won't be able to do that for are IET.
The one I'm worried about is that we have students that would go in the bucket and are being taught by different teachers right now. So would that make a difference? I mean, because we have.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's what I was kind of talking about. It's just, it creates less opportunity for you guys to effectively manage instruction because, if you will maybe know because maybe you don't have that many classes and all your instructors, but
right.
Think about like a really large consortium, and like if you were, HGAC and you're trying to figure out what's going on at Houston Community College, but you can't drill down at all into the data, then it just, it kind of, it can create, if you want to use it as a temporary and the goal is to get everybody an NRS test within 30 days, I'm with it. But if you're really unsure and you don't have a plan for like remote testing or face-to-face testing, that's when it becomes like more necessary to have a parallel class.
Yeah, because we're definitely working on getting everything we need in place. I mean, we've undergone a lot of changes, but so we're definitely restructuring all over again. I'm just trying to not have, over 100 classes listed in Teams that you guys are going to have to go through.
Yeah.
Or that we're going to have to go through. So sorry, guys. I'll try and make it as easy as possible.
Yes, I know. All these constraints with the testing, it's like, who knew that, well, I guess we all knew, but how important the testing was, but the system is completely built around it,
Yeah, no, I understand. And you know what? I get it. I understand the importance of it. I know why we have it, and it's okay. But I appreciate that we have options. I just am going to apologize in advance because I'll probably be redoing things several times.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Just letting you know in advance.
All right, folks. Well, poor Mahalia has been on for 2 hours, and we sure appreciate your generosity of your time and your wonderful knowledge. I just want to say thank you again, and thank you for participating.